morning, everybody. Happy, what a mad ding-dong day. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's deputy political editor, Ben Glaze. Morning, Ben.
Morning.
And Ben would rather be doing something else right now. His phone's probably going to be going mad because something's just happened in the world of politics. We'll get to that in a minute. This is the People's Pay-Per-View. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcasts are just going to have to try being Home Secretary without sparking riots, aren't you? So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on Home Secretary Suella Braverman's two-faced hypocrisy for laying a wreath at the cenotaph yesterday, just 24 hours after hooligans and members of the far right tried to desecrate it during the 2-minute silence, in large part because of stuff that she was saying before that silence. Now, well, she was Home Secretary at the time of writing the paper, wasn't she, Ben? But this morning we hear that she's gone. So what's happened and why has Rishi waited until Monday to do it?
Right, in the last 20 minutes or so, Suella Braverman has been sacked as Home Secretary. A fairly wide-ranging cabinet reshuffle, we think, has just got underway. Rishi waited this long to sack her because, essentially, you can't do it over the Remembrance Weekend itself because, obviously, Remembrance Weekend is about remembering, honouring our war dead, the fallen, the various commemorations that took place on Armistice Day and then on Remembrance Sunday itself. So you've got to wait until all that goes because nobody would want her being fired to overshadow remembering the millions of servicemen and women who have died in the service of our country. So Monday morning, you have your meeting in number 10 and you decide, right, let's get on with it. Let's get rid of her. So there were pictures from one of our photographers of her leaving her home in London this morning, getting into a big armoured BMW, I think it is, and driven to Westminster. And then a few minutes later, the news starts to drop that, yeah, she's been sacked. Interestingly, this morning as well, so James Cleverly, who's currently the Foreign Secretary, he's been seen going into number 10. There's very strong suggestions that he might come out as Home Secretary, so replacing Suella Braverman. And in the last couple of minutes, David Cameron, remember him? He just got out of a Land Rover Discovery, driven into Downing Street in his smart dark suit, and he's walked into number 10, a full
plot twist.
7.5 years after he left number 10 in the aftermath of the Brexit referendum in 2016.
Was he whistling, do we know, when he walked through the door?
We don't know why he's being called in. Now, he's a senior member of the party, obviously a former prime minister, well respected within certain conservative circles, certainly sort of the modernisers and the centrists. It's possible he's there to offer advice. I would think that's not the case because if you're offering advice, you don't go in through the front door with lots of cameras, TV cameras, stills cameras in front of you. It's entirely possible that he could emerge with a government job. Speculating wildly here, but there is precedent for a party struggling in the polls a year before a general election to bring back a big beast of the party, give them a peerage and hand them a cabinet job. I'm thinking Peter Mandelson in the sort of dying dog days of Gordon Brown's government. He was brought in, given a peerage and became business secretary and was a big ally of Gordon Brown's going into that 2010 general election. It is possible, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it is possible that David Cameron comes out with a peerage and could be a foreign secretary from the House of Lords. That you can do that. That is possible.
Good Lord and crikey and blimmin' heck. I thought it was in the back of him, but apparently not. It turns out he's the sensible one after all this. And Rishi obviously needs some allies. Now, what do you think? There's obviously been a lot going on today. There's a lot to digest. I haven't seen this guy since Brexit, remember. Now, for those of you, so what do you think about what's happened? Are you glad Suella's gone? Do you think it's a shame that she's gone? Do you think that Cameron coming back into government, if that happens, is that going to be great? Is it going to be a bit of a shame? Let's try and unpick it. Now, for those of you who have been under a rock for the past week, Suella spent most of it issuing statements and writing newspaper articles about the pro-Palestinian march being a hate march and that it threatened the cenotaph, even though it was taking place a mile away from the monument and on a day when there were no big ceremonies actually planned. Mike thinks that Cameron's appearance could be a sign that Sunak is planning an early election and wants campaign advice. But as Ben said, he would go in the back door if that was the case, Mike. Now, when it comes to the cenotaph, there was a small service at the cenotaph on the 11th of the 11th, which is the Saturday. It passed off very peacefully. It went ahead, but only because of a massive police operation involving officers who had to be bussed in from the home counties to supplement the Met, and hundreds of tanked-up thugs tried to push through their lines, even during the 2-minute silence. 9 police officers went to a hospital directly as a result of what happened there on Whitehall. The Palestinian march on the other side of London was mostly peaceful, but it also had its own horrid, nasty elements, including a lady with a swastika banner. Peace support expressed for the terror group Hamas, who are raging anti-Semites, and fireworks set off at the police. More than 140 people were arrested over the course of the weekend. About 100 of them were, let's call them football fascists. That, the far right got the far majority of the collars, quite rightly. Is that what she was fired for, though, Ben, do we think? I mean, obviously, we're waiting for the exchange of letters with Rishi to sort of try and show something of what's happened in there. But did she lose her job because she called the scumbags onto the streets, in effect?
There's no one reason that she lost her job. She's got a history of insubordination. She's got no respect for the Prime Minister's authority, and she knows that a sizable proportion of the hard right Conservative backbenchers support her rather than the Prime Minister. Back when Rishi Sunak, you remember, let's go all the way back to summer last year. Rishi Sunak lost the Conservative leadership election to Liz Truss. Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister. After 49 days, she leaves number 10 in ignominy because she's crashed the economy, mortgage rates are flying. So Rishi Sunak, it wasn't even an election because he ended up being the only candidate who got the number of nominations from Conservative MPs that could go forward to the party membership. But because he was the only one who got them, it didn't go to the party membership. So the party grassroots has never elected Rishi Sunak as leader and our Prime Minister. So she did this deal, we're told, with Suella Braverman that she wouldn't back, she would essentially acquiesce in his leadership. She wouldn't back Boris Johnson, she wouldn't stand herself in that second leadership race, and Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. He then reappointed her Home Secretary because, don't forget, one of the last things Liz Truss did as Prime Minister was to sack Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. Because she shared a confidential briefing with a Conservative backbencher. And obviously, if you're the Home Secretary, you get to see a range of intelligence that most of us should never see. And she'd broken the code, the ministerial code, by sharing it with a backbencher. Liz Truss, in a show of authority, sacked her, only for Rishi Sunak to bring her back. I think it was 6 days later.
6 days, yeah.
6 days. So the latest straw, if you like, with Suella, who, let's face it, she had a hell of a week. She said that sleeping in tents was a lifestyle choice. Then she wrote this article for the Times, basically accusing the police of bias when it comes to policing various protests, saying they go much harder on the far right than they do on the hard left. And this was in the run-up to the pro-Palestinian march in London at the weekend. And then it was seen that she was basically encouraging far-right people to go onto the streets and confront the far-left protesters and the pro-Palestinian demonstrators. And then we saw those scenes unfold where, no more than a few hundred, maybe even about 1,000 far-right activists started fighting the police, trying to get to the cenotaph. And there were, I think, 92 arrests from the far right over the course of the weekend, out of a total of 145. And when you do that as a proportion of the arrests, when there were 300,000 estimated on the pro-Palestinian march, and at best, maybe even a couple of thousand, if that, the far right activists, it's a much higher proportion who got arrested.
Yeah.
Suella then starts tweeting last night about new laws she's going to bring in to clamp down on protests, and I think number 10 have just had enough. Various ministers over the past week had to go out. They've got things they want to trumpet in their own portfolios, in their own departments, and all they're being asked is, do you agree with what Suella Braverman said about homeless people? Do you agree with what she wrote about the police? And it completely overshadows the business of government, and the Prime Minister has just had enough.
Yeah, no, well, fair enough. It does seem like there's an awful lot she's been very busy, isn't she? Margaret says it's a big mistake. Suella only voices what most people think. The surveys and polling appears to show that she doesn't actually. It's a minority of what people agree with Suella, but she did, as Alison says here, polarised a nation, and she offended the homeless. She offended people who aren't homeless as well, I should think, in lots of ways. Now, what do you think? Did she have to go? Could Rishi have done something else? Whether you agree with Suella or not, is it possible that she could have stayed in government when she's been as insubordinate as she has? Dan says, I see the racists and bigots are frothing at the mouth after their puppet's been removed because of her racist rhetoric. And now we have, it's got to be said really that, of those two marches that went ahead over the weekend, the pro-Palestinian march, the anti-Semites who were on that march and the hate mongers would have been there without her help. They were there on previous marches and they would be there on future ones as well, unless they all get arrested. And as Suella is married to a British Jew, she's probably quite rightly worried about that, as we should all be to some extent. But the football lot, let's call them, they wouldn't have been there, would they, without her? Do you think that she's from the police statement that was put out over the weekend, Ben, which said it was really that the police faced a bigger problem because of the rhetoric that was used about them, because they were said to have been biased by the Home Secretary. Those were some of the chants that were kind of fired at them by the far right. They were saying, "You're not England anymore," to the police officers who were trying to maintain law and order. Do you think, obviously, she had also lost the confidence of the police, and that when that happens with a Home Secretary, they're always on really shaky ground? Has that contributed, do you think?
Probably, yes. When she starts attacking the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, who is the most senior police officer in the country, remember, he's rank and file, and he's quite popular amongst rank and file Sir Mark Rowley. They take their orders from him, not from the Home Secretary. If she's lost the confidence of the police, then it almost makes the job impossible. And one thing that I think is worth commenting on is very late on Saturday night, too late for Sunday's papers, one of the assistant commissioners at the Met, an officer called Matt Twist, he basically said that disgraceful scenes of violence against his officers, and he said that the background and some of the commentary that had been around that week put extra pressure. Now, I paraphrase that. The exact quote is on the story I wrote yesterday, which is online on the Mirror's website. So I'm paraphrasing what he said. But it's quite obvious that he thinks Suella Braverman, as a Home Secretary, with that op-ed she wrote for the Times, made the police's job more difficult on Saturday. And it's very rare for a senior policeman to come out and say that. And obviously he didn't say it as explicitly as I just have, but it's quite clear what he was getting at. And on the BBC's Laura Koonsberg show yesterday morning, she basically put that to the government minister who was there yesterday and said, look, you've got this very senior policeman who's basically accusing her, the Home Secretary, former Home Secretary she is now, of inciting what happened on Saturday. And it's those sorts of incidents where ministers go out and they have to defend, well, let's be honest, most of them think it's indefensible. Yeah. That's been the final straw for Downing Street.
Yeah. Now, we've got also, on Wednesday, we have the predicted verdict from the Supreme Court on the legality or otherwise of Suella's Rwanda deportation policy. Now, she was sort of hanging her entire political hat on that, on the lower courts had ruled that it was illegal to deport refugees or asylum seekers, migrants, if you want to call them, to Rwanda to process their asylum claims there, because Rwanda couldn't keep them safe and they may well end up back in the country with them in fleeing in the first place. And that's gone all the way to the Supreme Court because the government has appealed it. Now, Rishi's actually hung quite a lot of his hat as well on the same verdict, hasn't he? So if that Supreme Court comes back on Wednesday and says, yes, it's fine, you can deport people to Rwanda, she's going to look on the back benches like she was right all along and Rishi was wrong to sack her. Whereas if the Supreme Court says, no, you can't deport people to Rwanda, that is illegal, Rishi's going to have to back away from it as a policy, isn't he? I mean, it would have been difficult for her to stay in job come Wednesday, really.
Yeah, just whilst we've been talking, Suella Braverman has issued a statement saying it's been the greatest privilege of her life to serve as Home Secretary. And rather ominously for the Prime Minister, she's added, I will have more to say in due course. So I don't think she's going to be an ally of his on the backbenchers. But that, the Rwanda judgment due from the Supreme Court on Wednesday. Now, the Prime Minister and Suella Braverman were in lockstep over this. They believe it is the way to combat the crossings of illegal migrants in small boats coming over the Channel to try and claim asylum in Britain. Now, one of the lower courts originally ruled that it was legal. Then another court ruled it wasn't. So it's ended up at the highest court in the land. The government is sort of, they're not accepting that they're going to lose, but they're braced to lose on Wednesday morning. Now, on the one hand, the Prime Minister is right to get rid of Suella Braverman this morning, because otherwise it allowed her to quit, or would have allowed her to quit on Wednesday, saying we need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, which a Prime Minister want to do. Because if the court says it's, that the Rwanda policy is incompatible with the ECHR, then Suella Braverman, who is not a fan of the ECHR and has always left the door open to quitting it, she could become the martyr. Right, we need to leave the ECHR. That's what I want to fight for. And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak doesn't agree with that. On the other hand, if he left her in post, he can say, well, you're the Home Secretary. You failed to get this policy over the line. I'll sack you now. So he's left in a bit of a bind. So I think by doing it now, whoever comes in as Home Secretary, and we are expecting it to be James Cleverly, he gets the judgment handed on Wednesday morning. If the court finds in the government's favour, it's like, well, from the government's point of view, happy days, let's start shipping people out to Rwanda early next year. And he carries on, and someone else has basically won him the victory, James Cleverly, or whoever our new Home Secretary is, has won that victory at the Supreme Court in front of 5 of the top judges in the land. If they lose, then James Cleverly, he's not associated with a policy that the government has ruled, that the court has ruled illegal. So he can either start again, and he's not as divisive a figure in any way as Suella Braverman. So the Prime Minister doesn't want to leave the ECHR. He's always thought that the Rwanda policy is compatible with it. And whilst he's never said we won't leave the ECHR as black and white as that, it's quite clear that he doesn't believe we need to, and he doesn't want to because he doesn't want the fight. Because if you have that fight, that is hugely divisive, and you will have that could split the Conservative Party. Not necessarily like the Corn Laws back 150 years ago, but if you have hard right backbenchers, a lot of them in a red wall, going into the election saying, I want to quit the ECHR, and then you've got centrist Conservatives in the home counties and parts of London, they will not want to quit the ECHR. They see it as a totemic issue where the government, and we helped write the ECHR.
You've got to go into an election with a coherent policy on that as a party, and you're just not able to fight it, are you? I like James Cleverly. I got drunk with him once. He seemed like quite a nice bloke.
He's a good bloke, yeah.
But I did have my wine goggles on at the time. So we've got too many comments to actually really go through them all. Mike points out that Suella had the lowest popularity rating of any minister, 16% approval. Ed called her a truly vile woman. She's obviously very divisive, and she made a lot of people argue. But what's going to happen next for her? She's going to go onto the backbenches, but is she going to quit altogether like some people have and just go off and make her way in the world of corporate finance or something? She says that quite honestly. She says, I've got more to say in the future. Do you think she's going to make a noise? Is she going to, as many people have suggested, make a run for the leadership if Rishi loses the next election?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you could look at today as the day the next Tory leadership election had really begun. Because she did stand for the leadership last summer in the first race before being eliminated. But she will see this as an opportunity to garner support among a certain rump of Conservative backbenchers, and crucially, amongst the Tory party membership, because they're the ones who, at least theoretically, vote for who they want to be the leader. So let's run with this scenario where the Rishi Sunak leads the Conservative Party into the next election, which we all expect to be next autumn. Conservative Party loses, Rishi Sunak's obliged to resign. he's not obliged to resign, but he would resign, it'd be impossible to stay. You then have a massive race between however many, possibly up to a dozen, of the remaining Conservative MPs who want to be the leader. It's possible some of them whose leadership ambitions we talk up at the moment, if it's a big Labour victory, Penny Mordaunt might not still be there. And she's one of the ones that, has been heavily tipped to be a leader in the coming years. So Suella Braverman is able to commandeer support amongst the Tory right. She becomes leader because of her hardline stance on immigration, on homelessness, and other sort of red meat Conservative issues. And this gives her an opportunity to sort of point the finger at the Prime Minister now from the backbenches. And every time, she gets up to speak in something, she can slag off the government and slag off the Prime Minister. To a certain extent, this works for her. She gets to become a martyr. And I can't remember, you read one of our readers there saying that, or viewers rather, saying that she was the least popular of ministers with a popularity rating of 60%. Now, I'm not familiar with what particular survey that's from, but my bet would be that's of the general public. What you need to do is look at her popularity standing within the Conservative Party membership. That's the percentage she really cares about. That's the electorate she's bothered about, because they're the ones who'll pick the next leader.
And of course, when she stood for the leader last year, she fell out very early in the race when it was Liz and Rishi that ultimately sort of ended up going to the final two and deciding it, because she just didn't have enough support to go on for very long. She had very few MPs behind her. But of course, what's happened in the year since then is she's built up a lovely head of steam in the grassroots, isn't she? And she's probably got far more support now than she did then. So while she's been Home Secretary, she's obviously seems to have been positioning herself she's grown a base somewhat. So we'll have to see how things pan out. I'm particularly interested to see what old dish-faced Cameron's going to be up to. Anyway, thank you for that, Ben. It's an awful lot's been going on, hasn't it? But now we have managed to find some good news out of this weekend, and there's a couple of amazing things I want to tell you about. And here it is. Now, yesterday was a really special day for many people, not least of whom were 45 nuclear veterans and descendants who were marching at the Cenotaph for the very first time with their new nuclear medal after a 4-year campaign by the Mirror. We went down there yesterday. The News Agenda team was down there yesterday to interview them, and here's some footage for you.
This is what the Cenotaph is for. Not coped up, drunk football hooligans, not people waving a flag for terror. This is for people who have shined their shoes, straightened their ties, and polished their medals. And today, there is one medal that is shinier than all the rest.
I just wonder why it was so long that we had to wait for it. 1960 was when I went to Christmas Island.
And it's 2023 before you get the medal.
Yeah.
What difference does it make to have that on your chest today?
Every difference, my love.
Poor as Michael Dillon from Oxford, as you can see, was a bit whelmed about what was happening yesterday. Now, yesterday, we thought that was going to be the good news that we'd talk about today. And I sent young Sam, my producer, home to do his editing. And after he'd skedaddled, I was invited to march around the Cenotaph with the veterans. Sam couldn't go around there anyway. But then something else happened. Now, John Williams is 81 years old. He's a veteran of Operation Dominic, a series of 24 hydrogen bombers that were detonated in the Pacific at Christmas Island by the Americans using UK troops in 1961. He was 18 at the time. If we can just bring up that first article that's in today's paper, there's a little story there about him. And if you want to go and find my profile on Twitter, you'll see there's quite a long thread that I posted last night that's had a lot of views so far. Now, John has always watched at home, but yesterday was his first trip to the Cenotaph, and of course with his medal, so it was extra special. Now, his son Keith was there walking with him, but John was he hadn't got very good knees, but he was determined to make it round without a wheelchair. He wanted to do it for his mates. Now, as we came past the Cenotaph, he was keeping up with everybody, but he started to fall back behind the others. And as we went sort of coming back round onto Horse Guards, he was getting slower and slower. The veterans behind us, of whom there were about 5,000, were slowing down and backing up so they didn't overtake him. He was about 200 yards behind the rest of the nuclear veteran contingent that had sort of just managed to get ahead. And by the time we came down towards Princess Anne, where she was taking the salute, the crowd who'd spotted this sort of small but determined test veteran were clapping him on, cheering him, saying, "You're nearly there, keep going." And then when he finally passed Princess Anne, we let go of him and he sort of managed to get past her under his own steam. She gave him a little personal salute just for him, which was a beautiful moment. Ben, is this proof, really, I suppose, after a particularly horrid weekend that we saw very nasty stuff happening at the Cenotaph, is this proof that you think this is really what the Cenotaph is for, to honour those that we lost in war, not starting more fights, and to clap home our heroes who were and to remember those who didn't make it that far?
That's right. I mean, the march past the Cenotaph yesterday, I didn't go yesterday, but I've been to 3 or 4 times on previous Remembrance Sundays. And the march lasts hours because you've got 10,000 veterans marching past. The violent scenes that we saw on Saturday on Whitehall, that lasts minutes, right? And the Cenotaph stands there 365 days a year. I walk past it several times a week up and down to Downing Street. It's always there. And we see the poppies, and it is what it is about. And your march past yesterday with John, having read the story and seen some of the pictures, it's very moving, and it is what it is about. So we can honour him for his service in the nuclear tests, and also he can remember his friends who went into conflicts and didn't come back.
And he finally got that first time he went to Cenotaph to have that moment and to have it with his medal, which made all the difference. Now, I'm afraid, because I was sort of propping up John on one side, and I was so caught up in everything, there is absolutely no footage of the moment that John made this determined march on his own back down Horse Guards very slowly, nor the salute that Anne gave him. There were lots of people there with their phones out. There were lots of media. If anybody is watching this and anybody has any footage of John's sort of personal march, please let us see it. Please let me have it so John can see it too. It's a wonderful moment. It deserves to be shared more widely. Right, Ben, we're going to let you go on with your day because you've got stuff to go and do and phone calls to make immediately to find out what the hell's going on. Thank you for sparing some time to talk to us about Suella and Cameron this morning. We'll have to see how all that falls out, won't we? Good Lord. But in the meantime, if you want to just have a little sort of uplift for something wonderful that has happened over the weekend, go and hunt out my Twitter feed and see the thread there about John and his little walk past Anne. It's absolutely wonderful to have seen it, and other people are sort of saying it's very uplifting as well. So go and have a look for that and it'll cheer your day up a lot. Thank you, Ben. Thank you everyone for taking part, and we will see you all again on Wednesday for whatever hellscape we're living in then, and another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, everybody, tatty bye.